There's a whole range of different sanders to choose from a belt sander to an orbital sander. Each one has got its own different application for a particular job. We've got 4 different types of sanders on the bench today. We've got a belt sander and 3 orbital sanders. I'm going to explain all 4 of them to you. Start off with the belt sander. We'll move these 3 out the way in the meantime. Now, before we get stuck into the belt sander, most important thing is safety as usual. Safety glasses, a mask, and also some earplugs. So some of these sanders can get quite noisy as well. Right, if you look at the belt sander, it's a continual belt, a seamless belt, runs all the way around, and it's got quite a rough finish on it, on the grit. This is going to run with the grain. Don't ever run across the grain. Okay, it's a very aggressive sander. It takes off a lot of material very quickly, so be gentle with it and only use it for a start-off point. Then we're going to finish off with the orbital sanders. Okay, we're going to get cracking and show you how it's done. Make sure that when you turn it off, don't let go, because it'll just basically run straight off the table. You see it runs forward like that. So hold it firmly, nice and tight. And of course, our timber is actually clamped nice and firmly onto the table, so that's not going to shoot off the other direction as well. Again, these sanders are very aggressive and very powerful. If you go across the grain, it's going to make very large scratches, and you've got to sand those out again, so stick with the grain. Keep an eye on the belt. Sometimes it'll start tracking off left and right. There's a little adjustment on the side here, and then you basically just keep testing it, adjusting it either way to get the belt back in the center position again. Right, moving on. We've got our surface finish here. We've machined it down. Now we're going to move on to the orbital sanders. Right, we've got a standard orbital sander, we've got a random orbital sander, and we've got a mouse sander or a detail sander. Standard orbital sander, what this does is it actually vibrates backwards and forwards like a little mini orbit, and we just go backwards and forward. It's for very fine work. It's not for taking off large amounts of wood like we did with the belt sander. The random orbital sander, very similar to this one, same kind of movement, but it also has a twisting motion as well, so you don't get those little scratch marks. It actually polishes it all out. And with the detail sander, that's for getting into hard, close gaps where these big ones can't actually get into. So if you've got corner portions, you can actually get into corner areas. For example, you want to get around a corner or into a corner portion. The mouse sander or detail sander is best for that. Okay, we'll show you how they all work. Now you can see it's actually made a very nice smooth finish. Got quite a vibration in there. It's basically going backwards and forwards like this. Once you're happy with the finish, you can move over to the random orbital sander, and that will just take out any little scratches that this one has left here. What's nice about these sanders, they've actually got a built-in little filter system which sucks all the dust through the holes into the filter system. So once that's full, basically we empty that out in the dustbin and you're A for away again. As you can see from this sanding pad, as it gets worn down, it's quite easy because it's just Velcro. Put a new one on and just make sure the holes line up, so it allows that dust to go through those holes and into that box again. It's exactly the same with the detail sander. You can actually take this pad off and you can get extensions for it with a long finger to get into those very difficult, hard to reach places. So there we go, that's basically what it does. More or less these 3 sanders do the same function, but each one's got its own benefit. Okay, we're going to show you how to change the belt now, but before we do that, we can see we're still going to use this belt, but a good way to clean it beforehand is you're going to run plastic along the belt, from a paintbrush or from an old toothbrush or something like that. And what happens is that plastic melts and all the dust and the resin actually sticks to the plastic. So it gives it a nice clean up for you. Okay, you can see now how the belt has actually cleaned itself up, and we can put it back into stock. How to take it off, open this up. Of course, the tool must be unplugged every time you do this. Now we're going to use a very rough 40 grit belt. You can see in the center here, there's an arrow, and that tells you the direction of the actual belt that it must run. Okay, so basically we slide that over. Obviously make sure the sander is unplugged when you do this. Okay, plug it back in, and we're ready to go. So now we've got a very rough grit. This is a 40 grit, as I mentioned. Much rougher in comparison to the previous one, which is an 80 grit. Now this is going to take off a lot of timber and leave a lot of scratching marks, but it's going to be ideal for something like this, which we've got some very rough spots here. Don't forget, always keep the sander moving at all the times, otherwise it's going to start digging down. And then we've actually smoothed that right off there. You can change belts now to use a much finer grit, give you a nice smooth finish, or we can move over to the Orbital Sanders and smooth it up with that. Okay, a nice little tip with the sanders, you can actually flip it over and use it as a bench sander as well. It's got some little grooves here, which you're going to use some clamps. I'm going to clamp it to the table. So basically we're going to rotate it around, flip it over like that, line it up. We're going to clamp this on nice and tight, just like that. What's nice is now you've got a nice solid anchored belt sander to your bench, and you can actually control your workpieces much easier as well. Now's a good time to actually wear the gloves, since we're not going to be operating the tools as much, more like operating the material. So try and avoid from getting splinters in your hands and stuff like that. So here we go. Now, if you have got any garden shears or stuff like that, it's a good idea to change the blade to a very fine grit, like a 150 or something like that. And then you can basically do the same action, and you're basically just going to run your blade across the belt as the belt's turning. Much easier way to sharpen your blades instead of doing it manually by hand. There are a whole range of different shapes and sizes and different grits available of sandpaper for your particular sander. Each one has got its own special application. Coarse grit for removing paint and shaping your wood. Medium for sanding before repainting to sand without altering the shape. Fine for sanding before applying a finishing coat of varnish. Very fine for smoothing a painted surface. Extra fine for smoothing between undercoats. Super fine, often used for wet sanding of varnish or lacquer for an ultra smooth finish. These tools are great, but again, remember, it's not a toy. These are quite dangerous tools, as I've showed you. So in the wrong hands, you can have accidents. So please be careful. Wear all the right safety gear and the safety equipment. And if you have any queries or any questions, pop down to your local builders and they'll be able to help you out and advise you which is the best sander for your application.